their first flag since 1965.
This is Sarah to win the game, and Essendon the premiers for 1985, winning 2 in a row.
Away goes Michael Law. Oh, what play! It may have been touched on the line. No! Zaharakis has kicked a goal. The Bombers are in front of the G.
To Watson, who emerges with the football. Some icing on the cake. Oh, what a finish!
The fairy tale's complete after a horror week. James Hearn, you are a genius.
You always reflect back after you finish football, and I've been finished now for over 10 years. It's a part of who I am. You know, the football club's a part of my DNA. It always will be. It's a part of my family's DNA. My mum was a Collingwood supporter, my dad was a Richmond supporter, but once I started playing, they were all Essendon supporters. That's what it means. When you come to the football club, you instantly feel like you're part of the family, you're part of the fabric.
Well, Bomber fans, what does Essendon mean to you? That's what it means to Adam Romanascus, one of the most popular Bombers in modern times. Welcome to a big episode of Working Through It. I'm Adam White, and you'll hear more from some of the great Essendon stars across the journey in this week's show on just what the club means to them. And we'll also hear a few from those that are out there listening today as to what the Bombers means to you. So we'll do that throughout the course of the show. Another special guest, probably the biggest one we've had almost, isn't it? It's going to be the captain of the Australian cricket team and Essendon fan, Tim Paine. He'll be our feature guest today. And a little bit later on, we're going to have a chat to someone that has been instrumental at the Essendon Football Club over the last couple of years, and that is David Reid. A few of you might not know a lot about Dave, but by the end of this episode, you certainly will. So it's a big show coming up, and let's get straight to the stars of the show. We'll start with Xavier Campbell, who is the CEO of the Essendon Football Club. And Xavier, question for you straight up. What does Essendon mean to you?
Yeah, thanks, Whitey. It's good to be back for another week. I mean, it's Essendon. It's always been in my family. I was sort of... We grew up in the country, obviously, and my earliest memory of going to the footy was with our next-door neighbour, who was also an Essendon supporter, and it took me to Windy Hill. I had to stand on a carton of beer for the day to watch my first game of footy, and it's just it's always just felt like, I think, as Ramos sort of described it, as part of the family. Like it's been all about rituals. It's been about sharing it with all of your family members. I've loved now bringing my son Freddie and daughter Francesca into the fold, choosing their number. The richness of the stories of the past, like I've loved all of that. So I've sort of, and it's been interesting. I never set out to be the CEO of the footy club. I think it's a real privilege, and I'm lucky to be where I am now. But it's a real honour as well, and maybe that probably helped me through, certainly the tougher years when I first started as CEO, because of that real passion and love for the footy club itself, and knowing what the footy club stood for so long before that, and wanting and being desperate to get it back to that point. So it's been an enormous amount to me.
A second part of the trio for Working Through It is James Heard. When we talk about family, we've pretty much got a fourth generation Bomber now at Essendon when it comes to the Heard family. Heardy, you've captained the club, you've coached the club, Brownlow medalist, premiership. If there was one thing that stood out, what does Essendon mean to you?
Definitely, I think the memories with my family, whether it be with my father and my grandfather as a child, watching the football on TV or going to watch Essendon play. Then with, my own family, with my kids and my wife, and being part of that Essendon greater family, and feeling very welcome as a player and a coach. That was a very special time when you've got, new wife, young kids, going to the games, going to the functions, and forming new friendships, and also being part of that, the Essendon, I suppose, supporter base, when you're able to walk, and you're greatly loved, and through the difficult times, there's obviously a bit of sweet there. Memories at Essendon with what happened towards the end of my coaching and what happened with the Asada stuff, but the support that was given to both myself and my wife and my kids by the majority of Essendon supporters was quite was tremendous, really, and just showed how good and quality people the Essendon supporter group are.
Talking about keeping in the family, Jobe Watson certainly falls into that category as well, watching his dad Tim play so many times for the footy club. Jobe, what do you reckon? What do the Bombers mean to you?
Yeah, hi, Whitey. I mean, I guess I echo the sentiments of both Xavier and Hurdy. It's, for me, it was, my childhood was growing up around the football club and watching Dad play and the enjoyment that provided, and with myself and my sisters and the extended family, and then being able to fulfill my, childhood dream and play at the footy club and see the enjoyment that provided to the people that I care about. It does feel very much like a family environment to me, and I think that you see that with supporters and members and like the level of commitment and passion that people have for the football club. It is, there's that tribal element about it, and that's why people are willing to sacrifice their time and financially to support the club, because it has such a deep connection for them, and it provides something that feels like family to them, and I think that is why football clubs are so special in our society, and certainly is for me.
We'll hear from Dustin Fletcher, Terry Danaher, Simon Madden, Mark Harvey, just a few big-name Essendon people about what the club means to them throughout the course of the show. But, guys, it is over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Whitey. I mean, keen to talk to Xavier and Hurdy about how things have gone this week. And I know personally, I've just been, you all know how keen viniculturalist Dad is, and how his vines are going, and the grapes down at Glenmaggie, and the Fiano's setting in the barrels. But I was very interested to see the Swan Valley setup that Cale Hooker has over in Perth, and the Hooker Shiraz. I don't know if you guys saw on the TV the story about it, but it seems like he's been keeping himself very busy over there. Hooksy, he's been pressing grapes, and he looks like he's enjoying himself.
Yeah, well, hopefully he hasn't been drinking too much of that wine.
I think hopefully he hasn't either.
He's just been Instagram pictures.
Bit of a surprise today. I was down having a kick of the footy down the Oval and ran into one of your ex-teammates and one of the best blokes in football, Brent Stanton, Jobe, today. Had a good chat to Stance about everything he's doing at Carlton, and it was good to chat to him and meet someone out of the blue. I think it's always good when you meet one of your ex-teammates or ex-players. He seems to be doing very well.
Yeah, he's taken over. I think he got promoted into midfield. Is that right, Hurdy?
That's right.
Before the start of the season. Yeah. Yeah, so obviously, Stance played a huge amount of his time through the midfield, and one of his biggest attributes was, like his ability to run and gut run and push himself and read cues. And I think he started with the development role at Carlton, has obviously blossomed and taken over a midfield role, which was great. It's great to see him, imparting his knowledge and wisdom and what he can add to players coming in the next generation.
Absolutely. And Xavier, you've obviously had a big week with return to play and football and when it's all happening. Maybe it'd be great to hear an update for Jobe and also supporters about, when football's coming back and what has to happen before the players can come back to training, what that looks like.
Yeah, definitely. It certainly feels like momentum's building now. I don't think it's not quite there yet, and I don't probably expect the AFL to come out until probably sometime next week, not necessarily the start of the week, but sometime next week, to make an announcement around what return to train, the timelines, the date, and what return to play probably looks like. But we're clearly now, we've got over the first hurdle. I mean, it was really pleasing for government to address that last Friday, and talk about the different processes and platforms that we need to reach as individual states before we'll be able to get back to training. But I'd imagine we'll be back at training within the next fortnight, and probably, ability to play probably from sometime from mid-June onward, I'd imagine, based on everything we're sort of hearing. I think there's a lot more complexity that needs to be worked through from the protocols, what return to play looks like, and just in terms of how training would be structured, given the parameters around social distancing and things like that. I think it's probably complex in the fact that the AFL has to deal with all of the various states, because some still have quarantines in place and others do not, and how a potential fly-in, fly-out model, which was probably something that I don't think was probably really seriously thought was a realistic option in the first to resume the season, now probably becomes a much more realistic option now, and perhaps even the preferred option of the league and many of the states. So it does feel like it's we've got some momentum now, and sort of now we're all sort of as footy clubs are starting to plan our, what our staffing is going to look like, our support models and everything else like that. So it does feel like it feels exciting, actually.
Xavier, in terms of, you're hearing sort of commentary from different stakeholders in the game. Some are saying, look, we should be able to come back and start training earlier because, our state isn't in as severe a lockdown. Others are saying, look, we need to get games, or can we push them back? Do you think that, is there a level of sort of ignorance into or frustration from your side as to how some of the other stakeholders are viewing the whole situation and how tedious or how difficult things are to actually manage, and the lack of, planning that has gone on?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think about it more broadly as a society. I mean, we've spoken about this at different points about the broader society viewpoint and not getting necessarily caught up in our bubble. I felt like we're very lucky to be working in this industry, and we're very lucky, as much as there's some challenges and clearly a lot of staff have been impacted, to think that we could actually be back playing at some point in the next 6 to 8 weeks, when many other industries have probably got even greater challenges than that, is something that we shouldn't forget either. And there's a lot of people talking about sort of, is there a point in time where maybe we shouldn't come back and we should just write this year off, or sort of things like that. I struggle with, because there is so much work that's going on behind the scenes to try and create a platform to come back. I think the game is very important to the people. It's not more important than the medical protocols and all those sorts of things, not one bit. And that has to dominate our thinking at any point in time when we start to look at return to play, and we can't compromise the broader society objectives around managing COVID-19. But I still think it's an important game for so many people, and it's an important game for so many of the players and staff who, it's their livelihood, and it's very important we get back to playing for them as well, where we can and within those parameters that we've spoken about. So at times I do get frustrated with the commentary, but we are also in one of the most unique and complex periods that any of us have ever operated in when you consider the pandemic impact. So it's sort of understandable, but I also think it's more than ever we should be challenged to think outside the square, think outside our own little wheelhouse, and truly understand the viewpoints of all the different stakeholders at the table.
Jobe, question for you around return to play. Xavier's talked comprehensive about off the field and what needs to happen. As the three of us have been closest to playing, how would you view the fact if you've been out of training with the team for 7 weeks, the fact that they're going to give you 3.5 weeks to come back? I mean, you used to take a little bit of time to maybe get yourself back in the game form, but seriously, you used to say, I need a couple of games to get back in, a few weeks of really hard training. Would you be able to do that in 3 or 4 weeks?
I think it would be. It's definitely going to be a challenge for the players, I think, and you hear the commentary from the players themselves about the standard of what it's going to actually look like early on. It's going to be scrappy, and the expectations will probably be that, look, we're going to take. It's going to take some time to find our feet because we're going through an unusual preparation. So I think that that will be something that will be evident from early games. I think it's going to take some time for players to get back into a routine physically and mentally, and 3 weeks is normally is not long enough. That's not. It's very difficult to emulate the type of change of directions, the speed that you get from match simulation training, and no one's been able to be able to get that. So I think it's going to be difficult, and I think that the standards of what we will see as a product is going to be something that is going to take a while before it actually looks like, okay, well, this is what AFL footy looks like to me.
And you'd have to think then, Xavier, with the players not being able to get prepared properly, that the injuries and the fact that your treatment of players, your ability of players, the club got a plan around perhaps extra injuries, around making sure that they're keeping players as fit as possible, and you have got a fit list, because it feels like it will be the survival of the fittest with a team that are, more so than perhaps in other years.
Yeah, sort of two parts to that, and sort of further to what Jobe's saying, is that the AFL's been really clear that yes, it's a 3.5 to 4 week pre-season with an absolute minimum 2 weeks where the restrictions are at level 3. So ultimately saying there has to be a minimum of 2 weeks where players are allowed to have the contact piece at play. Because to Jobe's point, I mean, it's sort of even level 2 where you're allowed to train in groups of 10, you're still not doing it with physical pressure. Not with physical contact. So it's sort of, I think that's another sort of nuance of the whole return to play piece that we sort of need to understand. I think, as we've sort of been saying to our players through Sean Murphy and the rest of the guys within the football department, is it's hard for them to stay up the whole time. Like, they've just finished a massive pre-season. You two know better than anyone, the significant physical, emotional demands around pre-season and the emotional build-up to round 1. And then to think that that's then taken away after round 1 and then you've got to go away and almost do another mini pre-season is very difficult. So we've been very careful not to push the players to stay at such a high level that there's potentially a come-down period. It's been very much about maintaining a relevant base so that when you come back to training, you are ultimately putting yourself in the best position to then progress naturally from there and not get any injuries, because this next 3 or 4 week block is going to be perhaps their most important pre-season that they will have done in a really short period of time. So it's particularly important they get that continuity in their training leading into what will be an early part of the season that's likely to have really short breaks and a lot of games in a really short period of time, which adds to that sort of nuances of the training piece.
I think you'll find the clubs that have it's hard to quantify, but it'll be interesting to talk to Dave Reid about Essendon's perspective, but the number of players who you have that are externally motivated by external factors and need the environment, need the buzz, need everyone around them, need coaches to train them, as opposed to those athletes that you've got, intrinsically motivated athletes who get out and train on their own and mentally are able to get through it themselves. You'll see a contrast in teams, I think, with the ones that can motivate themselves as opposed to ones that have needed to have that external motivation around them. And the teams that have the majority of intrinsically motivated athletes, I think, will be have a big, I suppose, advantage over those that don't.
Yeah, Hurdy, I wonder whether or not it's there's a correlation between, age and experience, because it is something that the longer you're in the system, the more you're able to run, and you're able to get yourself ready to go, and you know what the expectations are, and you know how to go. And, like you look at the teams that finish, up the top, and someone say like Richmond, they've just got, there's a lot of players that you would look at and they're in the right age bracket. They've got a really stable group who have played a lot of footy together, and that's the other thing that you're missing. There's actually missing games and that continuity of being able to play with each other, where there's a huge amount of development that comes through just being on the ground, getting to know how each other's playing. So it's going to be it's a good point where I think that there will be a wider gap.
Well, we might just leave it there for the moment. We've just lost Jobe momentarily, but it actually isn't a bad time. We'll get Jobe back because we are about to be joined by Tim Paine, the Australian Test captain and also a big Bomber fan. You're listening to Working Through It on this Wednesday afternoon.
Simple one. It's all for the people, and you realise speaking to different people what it means to them, whether it's 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or it's the last 6 months that Essendon have played. So they pay their memberships, and they've got the right to yell out and get stuck into it like most people do. But for me, it's all about those people that love the Essendon Footy Club and love the Bombers.
And Dustin Fletcher, 400 games for Essendon. That's what the club means to him. And from sentimental favourites like Dustin to new content offerings, Don's Digital is keeping you engaged, enlightened and entertained during the break. Head to essendonfc.com.au. Most of you would already be there at the moment listening to this to check it all out. I can tell you that Jobe is back. And it's important, Jobe, because you are of the three. You've got sort of some ins into the Australian cricket team, which you can explain a little bit more, because you've been in the inner sanctum. So I think it's appropriate that you introduce our next guest.
Thanks, Whitey. Sorry for dropping out there. I know I am looking forward to introducing our next guest and to having a chat with him about it. And I was able to get into the Australian locker rooms after a day's play at Edgbaston in the 2015 Ashes series, and I took a school friend with me who'd been drinking all day, and he managed to make a fool of himself in the rooms, and I had to try and escort him out and save face while talking to Darren Lehman. So it was a fun experience, but something that I still give him a bit of rubbish about today. But Tim, are you there?
I'm there. I'm here. Sorry, I should say.
Thanks for joining us, mate. We're looking forward to having a chat with you about it, and you obviously being a big Bombers supporter and missing your footy at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly am. I'm not sure my wife is. I think she's having the time of her life. I've never watched less television, and AFL 360 and all the stuff I'm normally glued right into, whether I'm at home or on tour at this time of year. But yeah, certainly missing it. Missing watching the Bombers play, missing a bit of local footy, and I suppose the socialising that comes with it for a cricketer this time of year.
Tim, welcome to the show, and thank you. It's a pleasure for us to have the Australian cricket captain on. And first, I think from all Essendon people, congratulations on what you and the team were able to do coming out of South Africa, and then bringing the Ashes back last year. I think it was fantastic, and to see your level of leadership come through that period, and on the show, the test that's been on Amazon has been quite incredible. Can I throw you back to 2010? It was, I think, when you broke your finger. We're all watching this up and coming potential star of the cricket world come about, but it didn't happen as easily. And I'm interested to understand how much of that experience enabled you to, gave you the toughness to get through what you had to get through after South Africa in 2018?
Yeah, well, I think it's played a huge part in it. There's no doubt about that. I'm not sure if it's sort of added toughness, but it certainly added a lot of perspective. It added some empathy and things like that I think coming through when I was sort of appointed as a future Australian wicketkeeper. I think I took a lot of stuff for granted. I think whether that's just, a young player being a young player and enjoying it and enjoying myself and perhaps getting a little bit far ahead of myself at times. But I thought, right now, looking back, those 2 years I spent on the sidelines have absolutely been the making of me. It allowed me to grow up a lot as a person. Allowed me to look sort of at myself a lot more. I learned a lot about myself. I watched a lot of people, read a lot of things, spoke to a lot of people, and really tried to develop, particularly as a leader. And at the time, I was only thinking that I was trying to sort of upskill those areas so I could come back into the Tasmanian program and make an impact there with some of our younger players. But it's certainly turned right around, and to be where I am now as the Australian captain, I don't think. Well, I know I wouldn't have been able to do the job that I'm doing now without having gone through those few years. So, whilst at the time it was difficult, I now look back at it as a real positive and something that's sort of allowed me to be where I am at the moment.
And Tim, I mean, we are all the sum of our experiences, and you took over, at a really difficult time as the Australian Test captain, and I think that when there's such, vitriol to a group of people from external who have no real knowledge of you as people, or and they feel that, and you as the leader, I mean, taking your mind back to that experience and what you were able to do to insulate the group, but also lead through such uncertainty. Do you remember, how you were feeling, or the messages that you were trying to convey to the people that you were about to lead about what was important and how we were going to get through to it together?
Yeah, I do. Again, because I came from sort of outside of that group. I'd been playing for Australia as a youngster, and then hadn't played. I had 10 years between Test matches, and what I had noticed as a first class cricketer around Australia and as a fan of cricket in general is that it was pretty obvious to me that the Australian cricket team, with the way they were going about it at times, was getting on the nose of our fans and of people who watch the game in this country. So, look, for me, it was about making sure that we started to drive a team culture again, where people were thinking first about the team. I thought at times there was, and again, this was only from I was, as you guys were, as an external person. It looked to me that we'd sort of started to have a team that was just had some little fractions in it and little groups, and people were more worried about themselves and who was getting paid what and who had what sponsorship and who was the best player and who was what not, rather than how privileged and how important the Australian cricket team are as role models for people around this country, and the history that goes with playing in that team and wearing that baggy green cap. And so for me, South Africa was an extremely unfortunate moment, but again, looking back, a time to be able to reset and have a look at our values and why we want to play and why we do play and what's important to the Australian cricket team and how that looks to our fan and our public. So, it was an opportunity, I guess, to reset. But, I mean, my main message was that that everything we do now is about making sure the first decisions we make are about the team. We spoke a little bit publicly about wanting to make Australians proud again and becoming better people. And, I think that's something we not only spoke about, but we've walked the walk in the last couple of years. And, I've certainly been really proud to be involved in it.
Tim and Xavier Campbell, thanks very much for joining us. It's a real privilege for us to get you on. You mentioned there the resetting of the values, and obviously I haven't watched the test yet, but I've had multiple people mention to me the part about you guys going about that process and that being brought to life in that documentary. Can you just talk to the process you put in place and the challenges and, I guess the triumphs that you felt that process helped you guys achieve?
Yeah, look, I think, well, firstly, when it kicked off, it was probably mainly JL coming in with his experience, and he had a really, really clear way that he wanted things to run and he wanted people to behave. So he came in at the start. I still remember it. He sat us all down in Brisbane and basically gave us, 4 or 5 core values, I think, that he believed in, and he was so strong on them for the first probably 6 months. And it was probably the first time in a while we'd had something like written up in front of us. And again, we started to build that real team first. This is how we behave, whether we're on the field, off the field. Rather, it had become a kind of a very individual type thing, which I think needed to change. So I think JL brought that in. And then over the next sort of 18 months, we've massaged that. We've changed the wording of it. We changed the language and, basically, as you do, you guys would know, you sit around in a team and we've come up with stuff that the team believes in, but it was certainly JL who set us on that path. Looking back again, it was a really key moment, and again, was able to switch the guys' thinking from, what do I want to do today to what do I have to do and what does the team need from me. So, everywhere we go now, we've got our values up on the room, and the other thing we do a lot better and a lot more is actually check on them and pull each other up on them. So we have sort of check-in meetings every month or two when we can get the whole group together and sort of mark each other on how we're going and give some stern feedback or some really good praise for people that are towing the line and living our values. And another thing we spoke a lot about, and JL is very strong about, is making sure that we're living them 24/7. So it's important that we take our standards back to our states, back to training, back to everyday life. And as I said earlier in the thing, one of those things is about making Australian proud, and that's it's not just talking about it; it's making sure we're living it, and living it away from the team is just as important.
Tim, we have a lot of young listeners listening to the program, young footballers, cricketers, netballers who, and what I'm intrigued with yourself is your ability to stay in the moment. You know, you got your captaincy, the keeping, and obviously batting, and you can be you can make a lot of runs, or you can take a great catch, or adversely you can get out early, or you can drop a catch, or you can make a wrong decision setting the field. How do you get back to that moment where you've got these three massive roles and stay in the moment day in, day out, particularly in that Ashes series where, you know, that series would swing on, you know, a moment in tests across that whole series? Yeah.
Again, I think looking back to my early days as captain of Tasmania, that wasn't a strength of mine. I was reactive. I could get a bit punchy. I was a bit of a my way or the highway type captain, and again, I think that was just experience. But I think now the experience I've been through, having everything that I'd always dreamed of sort of taken away from me, and then never thinking I'd getting it back, and then to 10 years later, sort of out of nowhere, be back in the test team. And I remember then that I just promised myself that I would do exactly that. I would live it in the moment. I would treat it every test match as my last. And then from that moment, I became the captain, and I thought, well, it's worked so well for me in the last however many tests, I'll just stick at it. So, I just think you sort of mature and learn a lot about yourself, particularly in difficult times. And as I said, I'm really lucky to have been given a second chance. I've been able to take stock, know where I needed to improve, go away and do it, and then get another chance. But yeah, in terms of staying in the moment, I think it has become a real strength of mine. And then driving we had some really clear processes set up for how we thought we could beat England. The only way we were going to get off course from that was if we got caught up in the emotion of it, which can be difficult playing in England. It would be a bit like you guys going to Perth or Adelaide. When the whole crowd's against you can sometimes just get caught up in that. So, it's important for your leaders in particular is to make sure that we're always on task. And cricket, you've got a little bit of time. You've got more time than you think if you just keep yourself calm and keep yourself cool. And again, it's probably one of the slight differences to footy. We've got that breather every ball where you can just take stock and make some sensible decisions. And that's all we were trying to do, really.
And Tim, we were talking earlier on in the show about what Essendon means to us, and we've all had different experiences growing up. But for you, I mean, where did the Essendon connection come from, and what is the club and your experience with AFL? What's it look like, and what's it been?
Yeah, well, Essendon's football club's actually quite a big part of my family's life. My uncle Robert Shaw was, I think, brought to the club in about 1974 or 75, I think it was, as a 16-year-old out of Sandy Bay. So, everyone in my family, bar my brother, who, can you believe or not, is a Collingwood supporter, and my dad, who is now a pretend Brisbane Lions supporter. He was a Fitzroy fan. Then he went to Brisbane. Then they weren't any good. And then he jumped back on about the time they won those 3 flags in a row, and he hasn't left them. So, but yeah, certainly it goes back to Uncle Rob. And we've sort of, as you do when you have people like that in your family, we've sort of followed him around to Adelaide and Fitzroy and places like that. But I think, he was someone that our sort of whole family, I suppose, looked up to. So when he was an Essendon player back in the day, my mum, my sister, my nan, all our family were always Essendon people, and they still are at the moment. So there's not too many Paine or Shaw household dinners or lunches or Christmases where we're not talking something about the Essendon Football Club. So it's become a really big part of all of our lives.
Shorey was a great coach, Tim. Spent a lot of time under Shorey. Have you ever copped a spray from Shorey? Because he can give one of the best of all time.
I do have one memory of it as a youngster when I can't remember how old I was now, but it was Tasmania versus Queensland Northern Territory at Belrive Oval in a State of Origin game. And he got one of the trainers to take me and my brother out of the change rooms before he gave his last speech. And, it was down at Belrive Oval, which then wasn't developed into a great stadium. So we were literally standing outside the door waiting to run out with the team, and he absolutely let him have it for about 5 minutes. So I'd never heard language like it. So it was certainly an eye-opener, but I've heard some famous stories about some of Rob's sprays, but I've been lucky enough to steer clear of them, except occasionally if you get on his nerves when I was a youngster and he was trying to fish and not having much luck, you wanted to stay away from him then.
Yeah, don't worry. He certainly could give a spray to a young fella or an old fella. He had four loves. He had his family, he had football, Manchester United, and the Australian cricket team. And I think between all four of them, there was no time left. So, yeah, fishing was a love, but I've never seen a man as demented about staying up late at night watching sport. What's that?
On the test team, don't worry. I think he's become a part-time selector of the Australian cricket team in the last sort of 2 years. So.
Have you got a favourite Essendon moment, Tim?
A favourite Essendon moment? I didn't mind Hurdy when he put himself in the middle of that game and got the centre clearance and then went forward and next ball up, kicked the goal and gave the bloke a high five. That's probably one of them. It's probably a bit embarrassing, Hurdy, but you were always my favourite player growing up, so that's one that I certainly remember. And apart from that, there's obviously the 2000 grand final, which, obviously an Essendon fan, but Robert being involved as an assistant coach as well were two of probably my favourite Essendon moments.
Oh, thank you for saying that, Tim, because I've now gone up my three sons' estimations. We'd sit and watch the test and watch yourself, and I'd try and explain to them you're an Essendon supporter, and I said, Dad, shut up, would you? So I'll certainly be using. I'll get that off the tape for later on. So thank you for that.
No worries at all.
Well, Tim, thanks very much for having a chat to the guys. It's great to get your perspective on cricket, but also your love of the Bombers, and we'll hopefully see you back out in the cricket field soon.
Yeah, let's hope so. It looks like fingers crossed we can get India out here and cricket will be in a lot better place. But yeah, certainly looking forward to the footy season starting. Give us something to do down here in our pre-season, and thanks very much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Tim Paine, the captain of the Australian Test cricket team. Great privilege, as Hurdy said, to have him on the line on Working Through It. A bit of a short break, but don't go anywhere because Dave Reid from the Footy Club will join us shortly on Working Through It.
Footy club. If you keep it in that contents, that it's a football club, it's been like a second home to you, throughout my time and my journey in life. And I don't see quite as much of it now as I once did, but it was a place of mateship, and a place where you get to express yourself on the field and play something that you really enjoyed, and that was.
What a legend he was, Terry Danaher, absolutely red and black running through his veins. Before we get to our next guest, Hurdy, just on Terry Danaher, can you explain to our listeners what it was like when he was back as an assistant coach at the club, where he was pretty much doing as much training as the players there at one point when he was well and truly retired? He couldn't get enough of the action.
Yeah, he's the hardest worker in football I've seen by a mile. And as a kid growing up, my idols were Tim Watson and Terry Danaher, and used to, wax and wane between which one I was in the backyard and kicking goals. And when I got to Essendon, Tim obviously had the skills and was, obviously captain of the club. And then there was Terry, who I just couldn't believe how hard this guy would work. And not only would he complete training, but then he'd go and run up and down the grandstand for another hour away from the rest of the team. It was a phenomenal experience and just a super quality person who led from the front. You can see why Essendon was such a great team back in the 80s with the quality of people. But Terry was a great player, and he's a very good coach. But one of his weaknesses was he couldn't work out why everyone couldn't run for 5 hours and wouldn't train quite as hard as he would. But I remember, I know we've got to get to Dave, but I remember getting a letter from a supporter the day that I got given the number 5. Basically, and this lady was explaining to me how unworthy I was to have the great number 5, and that Terry Danaher was the greatest player to have ever played the game, and that I should hand it back to the club. So, but no, Terry was a favourite of mine and a really, truly great person.
Fantastic
story.
But
we digress, and we have, obviously, Xavier, you might want to introduce Dave. I don't think Jobe might have met him, but I haven't, so maybe it's over to you, Dave.
Yeah, no, it's great to have Dave on. I mean, it's at a time where, competition is so fierce in the AFL landscape, and physically, all teams are probably training at a very similar level, I'm sure, different methods and things like that. But in terms of the capacity they've got in their training physically, it's all teams are very even. But when it comes to where we always felt there's an opportunity is around the mental space. And Dave Reid has joined us as our mental skills coach. He's been with the club over 2 years now. And Dave he's got a bit of a unique background. He's a forensic psychologist. So he comes from a different background. But it's great to have you on, Dave. Welcome to the show, mate. It's been a busy few weeks for you, obviously.
It has been. Yeah, Dave. It's great to be on the show. Thanks for inviting me along.
Dave, just from myself, and nice to meet you, and congratulations. We're hearing great things on what you're doing at the club from Xavier, but also from a number of players. As a player, in my early days, we had psychologists and sports psychs, as they used to call them back then, and very much if you went and saw the sports psych, you had a problem. That was how it was viewed then. How do you balance your time now? Well, obviously, it's not the case now. How do you balance your time between high performance, which, obviously we want to get our players to perform higher in a better way with their mental capacity, but also the wellness side of the mental skills side of things? Is that hard to get a balance on, or the framework you've set up enables you to do both?
I think it is a bit of a challenge, if I'm being brutally honest, but particularly around building rapport with the people within the four walls, and then building, their confidence that you'll be able to maintain confidentiality and provide clinical interventions that are appropriate. That's the real big challenge. The performance stuff is a lot more acceptable. We at the club, I feel very fortunate. We've prioritised what we call the mental gym, which is just a dedicated part of the program now. It's been built up over the last couple of years, and that's just something that everyone buys into. All sessions are just part of like any other session, like a skills session or a session in the physical gym. The mental gym is just part of the program. So in terms of actually the mental skills for performance, that's a dedicated part of the program. It's something the players are, increasingly open to training. So the real delicate balance is actually how do you build relationships with players so that they feel comfortable and confident to come and see you, particularly around very delicate matters. That's far more difficult, and what I find is I have to be very careful around my relationships, particularly with people like Xavier and the coaches, to make sure that I'm not being seen as maybe too close to those people, because I think it's a very real risk that I run. The players will find it difficult to approach me if they feel like it's not done in confidence. So yeah, it is a challenge.
And Dave, it's Jobe Watson here. Nice to meet you, and thanks for, as Hurdy said, thank you for all that you're doing at the football club. I'm just I'm keen to get your thoughts on, like how an AFL player at the Essendon Football Club compares to someone in society, from the way in which you would treat or educate or help someone who's like at Essendon, as opposed to an everyday person who's working and the same sort of pressures that they might have.
Do you mean as in like what we're going through now, Jobe, or what do you?
Yeah, in terms of the current climate, what are the sort of the tips and things like that you've been giving to the players?
Yeah, well, I think the starting point is there's a lot of similarities. Like we're all, a lot of our work roles have gone by the wayside now, and so we're all just human beings going through a pandemic. So there's a lot of similarities. I think that. The starting point in terms of making sense of the situation is that it's been very disorienting and overwhelming initially, as we all wrestled with a bunch of different things that were consistent. But whether you're a member of the general public or an AFL footballer or a coach, the role changes at work and the financial uncertainty and all the things that we've had to wrestle with, partners losing jobs and the constant influx of information. So in that way, there's been a lot of similarities, and certainly I think that's progressed over time with the pandemic. And now what we're seeing a lot of in both footballers, coaches and the general public is that there's this toll that's starting to take effect of being confined to our houses for an extended period of time, where there's this general malaise and kind of mental fog and fluctuating motivation that I think is hitting everybody, not just footballers. The thing that's probably a bit different with footballers is that they're really starting to miss the intensity of competing. So they're really looking forward to getting some clarity about what the season looks like, because that's probably a unique part of their everyday life, that they actually compete very regularly, and the intensity of that really can't be replicated. So the impact is, I think the emotional roller coaster that everyone's been on, and all of us on this call, I think, are part of that, around feeling stressed or exhausted or irritable or having disturbed sleep or feeling anxiety. That stuff's actually quite similar, and would be very similar to what we've been talking about with the players as well.
Dave, I think it's a fantastic way of talking about what's going on at the moment, because you are at home with either your loved ones on your own or trying to work, kids around, and the ability to get irritable is, except for myself, obviously, happening not much at all. But just in terms of, and there's two parts to the question. Firstly, we see AFL footballers, we see coaches, we see people in the AFL industry having issues outside of football, and it gets put in the news, and obviously it's clickbait. People want to read about it if a player has a problem. Take aside the fact that it may be less or more so within society, that the fact that football is a high profile, it gets publicised more. What parts of the game, whether inside a football club or the whole bubble, cause this effect to happen? Is it a more pressure environment than a normal job? And are we seeing more and more people in the football industry having problems with mental health or mental wellness? Or is it just something that's being highlighted more because, it's higher profile and it's a better story?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's something that I don't want to just say something quite simple. I think it's actually very complex. And I think the first thing, in terms of comparing the people within the footy industry or professional sports and people who are in the general public, is, or certainly something that I've learned through this period, is that our players are actually very resilient. And as professional athletes, what I've realised is they do a lot of work preparing themselves for managing stress and distractions. And I don't really want to say that they do they experience more stress than people in the general public, because I'm not sure that that's right. I'm not sure if we could actually say, to be honest, because some people find being a professional athlete exceptionally stressful, and others find it a very manageable level of stress. And then similarly with the general public, some people find life exceptionally stressful, and others have moments of stress, but otherwise it's manageable. So I kind of don't want to say that I have the answer to that necessarily, but what I would say is that we do things in the club that I think have prepared them well for this period. We regularly discuss with what is a really young cohort of men, things like emotional exposure and sitting with uncertainty. And, they sit with difficult emotions like anxiety and uncertainty on a weekly basis. And, we do a lot of stuff around practicing observing their thinking and identifying helpful and unhelpful thoughts. And, so they're actually quite good at managing uncertainty. And that's one of the things that I would kind of say. But I also don't want to say that none of our players aren't finding this period challenging. It's absolutely not the case. But I do think that a lot of the mental skills and practices that we've been putting in place has actually helped a lot of them through this period. In terms of the broader part of your question around why, I think it was kind of talking about why some people sort of maybe struggle with moving out of this into sort of transitioning into life after football. Is that what you kind of meant?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's a really complex issue. And I think it's an awesome talking point for people to be considering, particularly people involved in the industry. And I think that this is an issue for professional sport. We know that now across the globe. But I also think it speaks to a generational issue more broadly. And I think the biggest challenge we're facing currently is one of identity, and specifically identity formation. And I think prior to this pandemic, the mental health outcomes in Australia were pretty concerning. The rates of anxiety, depression, suicide, they were at record highs, and we were a very addicted and obese and in debt generation. And I think that that is not a sport-specific issue, but I think that there is a particular lens that should be applied to professional sport. And I think that all I can sort of speak to is what we try and do at Essendon. One of the biggest kind of mottos we have is that footy is what you do, it's not who you are. And so we give a lot of thought to trying to create an environment where identity is able to be developed appropriately. And And that's actually a really big challenge. We've got people like your son, still teenagers coming through the club, and, in a competitive industry, in a hostile environment like AFL footy, how do we actually move towards an environment of true sort of psychological safety where relationships are so deep they can be tolerated honestly, and we can share things without judgment? And we, in high performance environments, how do we respond when people make mistakes or errors, particularly skill errors, which is really frustrating at times? So first of all, I'd say, in terms of trying to answer the question, I think we need to address what sort of environments do we want for our people, and what sort of environments help identities form in a really healthy way. And I think that is a bigger issue. That speaks to school environments and work environments and home environments. But fundamentally and more broadly, I think the starting point for these problems sits with something a bit bigger, and I think that is a bit of a deeper sense of, or a yearning, I guess, for meaning and a craving for a higher quality of lived experience. And I think that's at the crux of what we're seeing with these difficulties transitioning into other areas of your life or another phase of your life. So one of the things we talk a lot about at Essendon is purpose. And, we go through an activity with all of our players, coaches and staff. And, when I say that I feel really lucky to work at Essendon, it's for that very reason. Like, when we do something with the players, we end up doing it with the whole organisation a lot of the time, which is, I think, a really unique thing. But we go through an activity which helps them answer, the question of, what their purpose is and what are the guiding principles in their life. And I just think that's not an AFL thing. It's just a huge part of identity development. And then the natural extension of that is, so how does what you do help you express your purpose? So whether it's you guys hosting a podcast, or whether it's Xavier in his role, or whether it's a footballer trying to get a touch on the wing, how does what you're doing help you express your unique purpose? And this is something that I've sort of tackled at both Essendon, but also in other franchises, and it's always the same. People are really invested in creating environments where we give people time and space to get that clarity. And my fear is at the moment that we actually don't do that enough in our schools and at home. And so we have a difficulty, a problem with the development of identity in our people. And so, I think that's something that we need to give a lot more consideration to going forward.
Dave, I just sent the boys that article, that Harvard Business Review article, what happens when your career becomes your whole identity. That article we took the leadership group through, which it was a relatively straightforward article. It was a great article. It's probably a good one for them to have a look at, and based on the discussion we've just been having now. But it's clearly been something that's been very topical, and I would love to think that when we look at how football looks into the future, and it may well be that, if there is small lists, if there is less contact hours at the club, I would love to see greater opportunity and emphasis put on positioning the players to get broader experiences outside the football club. Not mandating it. You don't want to mandate things, but just short of mandating, just to allow them to get that broader perspective, to allow them to understand how other markets and industries work, to feel valued in a different way, to not just be always caught up in just, Jobe the footballer or James the footballer, which, for these two, having known them closely for a long time, the football was never just about football for them, and clearly then the transition becomes easier after football, for example.
And I think that when we do resume, I think it's going to be an awesome opportunity to accelerate that discussion. What have people learned over this period about themselves, about their relationship with their craft, which is footy, and what have they learnt about, why they actually exist, like what's the purpose of doing this, why are we bothering? And I think to me that actually is the starting point for a whole host of discussions around how we structure our program, how we help people develop over their time at the club, particularly these people who are going to be there for a long period of time. I think it's a great opportunity to accelerate a lot of those discussions when we resume.
Dave, I'm just curious to get your take on when, with the explosion of social media and sharing and things like that, as these younger guys who have grown up in the environment where it is normal to share experiences with a public forum. Have you noticed that because it transitions very quickly from you sharing everything that you've done as a teenager to then being that is then turned into exposure once you become an AFL player, and how the young guys are able to balance that with, okay, now all this sharing and openness that I had is now giving me exposure for the opportunity for negativity that comes in, and that's having an adverse impact on my experiences as an AFL player. Is that something that you've noticed with the guys as there's been that transition to a lot more openness and sharing of content of people's lives as they're sort of growing through that teenage years?
Yeah, I think it's a big issue, and I think it also, I mean, talking broadly about phones, I think it also expands to things like access to things that we maybe didn't have as teenagers ourselves growing up, around access to things like gambling sites and information in general. And but I think definitely it's another source of stress at the moment, and it's a huge distraction for a lot of people. And I think we've kind of built a bit of a rod for our own back in many ways, with a lot of players being told that, you know, they are their own brand, and so they need to be very careful about how they present themselves on social media to the external world, and potentially the benefits of doing that. But I think the pitfalls of that are very clear for anyone who's involved in it, in terms of the instant feedback that you receive straight after the game. And, you know, I went to an NBA game in October of last year, and halfway through a game over there, every single player and coach was on their phone, halfway through a game, through an NBA game. And you get, you know, a sudden realization that, yeah, the feedback is now instant. And when you link it to how gratification works and how we're looking for some sort of recognition or something in terms of feedback, you see how it can be a slippery slope both ways. We can overvalue that feedback, and we can also we can actually overreact to it very quickly. So I think it's a really tight balance, and I think that we need to shift the narrative around branding and around how open we expect our athletes to be, with also tempering that with what are the added stresses that come with this. And while we want our athletes to be open, do we want someone to be able to reply to their Instagram feed very personally and immediately, or do we need to protect some of the players and high-profile people from that? I think it's a really broad discussion, and it's one that's not going away. It's one that we have to educate people on, and it's probably a bit of an individual thing as well. Some people are more open to it, and others would prefer it to be closed. So, yeah, really interesting one. I'm not sure if that's answered your question or not.
Dave, we're being wound up, not because you're absolutely fascinating, and this could talk for hours, but I think we would be here for hours if we kept going. I think it's thoroughly interesting. One question you may or may not be able to answer, it's about the team. I've always thought that to be an elite team, you physically have to be at the right age, done the right amount of work, your game plan has to come together, and you've had coaches enough time to put that game plan together. You talk about the mental gym, I think that's what you referred to later. How far away is this team from being mentally ready to be elite, if that makes sense? And you don't feel like you have to answer it, but it's be great to know from a supporter's point of view, are we close to being mentally elite, or do we have to go through a bit more to get there?
What I would say is that they're definitely invested in working on their mental game, and I think that there is a true investment that's taking place. And I think that John Worsfold and Ben Rutten, it's not lip service. They're genuinely invested in it as well. So certainly our players are showing great growth in terms of their ability to develop self-awareness. So they do a lot of deep diving into thoughts and emotions and understanding, you know, how to unlock behaviour. And they're using the mental skills that we're actually giving to them. But it's all an offering. It's not something that we impose. So it's really an experimental kind of, offering. What I would say is that people are getting clearer every day about how they want to play the game, and they're getting clear about how they can support their teammates. The on-field connection is something that we take very seriously, and the players are tested on it. So how can they actually help their teammates to be at their best when they're out there in that hostile environment? I'm seeing some great growth in that area. Whether or not, I don't know exactly where it sits in relation to other people that we're competing against. I really have no oversight of that. But what I can say is that we're making great progress in that area, and there's an appetite to keep doing the work. And I believe that's the key. Is if there's no appetite to do it, you're basically hoping. So, yeah, from what I'm seeing, it's really positive. I can't give you a definitive answer, Jones, but it's moving the right way, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Dave, thanks very much for joining us, mate. It's great to have you on the program. It's a great platform for us all, and that's what was established to communicate with the members, provide some insights, talk about the current landscape that we're all dealing with. And I'm sure for many, they will have taken insight, and even just that they can relate to their own personal lives, mate. So thanks very much for coming on the program.
No problem.
Well, we've been waiting for that for a long time to chat to Dave Xavier, and that was absolutely worth the wait. That was absolutely fascinating. There's no question about that. I'm sure Essendon fans and members would have got a lot out of that, just life lessons as much as anything else. Jack Jones, talking about legends, what a legend he is to Essendon. Unfortunately, he lost his life this year, but he's still going to have an indelible mark on the football club, and here he is talking about what Essendon means to him.
You can't say anything to me. I'm red in one eye and black in the other. I'm like mortar in between the bricks at Essendon Football Club.
Jack Jones, as I said, an absolute legend of the football club. It is time for the Coles Mighty moment. Now, this one is a little bit different. It's not something that happened on the field. It was something that happened off the field. To explain a little bit more, here is Paul Salmon.
Congratulations to the Essendon Footy Club for coming through what was a very difficult period and come through so galvanised and so together. It's exciting to see all these passionate people determined to get behind the boys, behind the club, and win or loss now moving forward. It's about really just being a part of one big group and family that is heading in a really exciting one direction, and I know the boys would appreciate it very much. It's a big thing to have your fans behind you, so well done, guys.
So that was when Essendon marched to the G, the players marched to the G in that game against Melbourne. Now, I'm going to start with you, Jobe. I know you weren't playing that day, but I'm sure that it resonated with you about just how big and powerful that moment was for the football club.
Yeah, it certainly was, Whitey. I mean, I was down at the farm, actually, and I think I watched the game from there, and just to see, like the level of support that we had, and how passionate people were, and that they turned up and were walking along the bridge to the game and still cheering and united, and knowing that they were facing, like a whole season that was going to be, there was going to be a really tough season to be a supporter of a football club. But these people who came out, who had supported the players through thick and thin, and were going to continue to do so. So, I think for me, it's one of the great shots that I have instilled in my memory about the Essendon Football Club and its people.
They beat Melbourne that day at the MCG, certainly against all odds. I'm not sure whether I should ask you this question, Jobe, or maybe Xavier, because you were very much part of the football club that day. Was it a bit of a game changer in the sense that players that may have been disillusioned with the club, fans that may have been disillusioned with the club, really sort of thought, nah, this is Essendon, this is still something that means a hell of a lot to me? There seemed to be something sort of intangible about the momentum that moment brought to the club.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd sort of taken myself back to that moment. Just after that game, I remember having lunch with Cale Hooker. Obviously, Hooksy was suspended, and I remember it was just distinct for me how significant the impact was on him. He said, wow, what about the fans? What about how many? So many fans were behind it. Look, did you see the pictures? Like, he was just amazed by it. And then he was, the other part was, what about the young players? That was just so exciting to see them. And I think that was a really important moment for us. I know, like, for me personally, like I said, it had been such a challenging few months, even just to get to the season. Like, we had to overcome so many obstacles and it sort of felt like that period of time and trying to work through top-up players and everything else like that was just so difficult. To finally get to a season was a relief in itself. But then to see the outpouring of support that day, it's sort of, the membership physically, they come to games, they pay significant money to get behind their team. But there's this other intangible piece around emotion that they provide, the emotional support for the players, obviously, for the administrators. I just feel like the Essendon, being an Essendon supporter my entire life, having spent so much time with Essendon people, they're the most loyal supporters you could ever find, I'm sure. Like, there's no doubt about that. But they also drive accountability with their people as well. You know, they're demanding, they want to be successful, and that's good and that's fair and that's entirely understandable. And you know, that day was a really important moment in our history. It was disappointing we're in that position, but in terms of that and what it meant for us, that was huge that day.
All right, let's continue this flavour about what Essendon means to so many of the Bomber legends, and Simon Madden certainly fits into that category.
And I'm player 820, which means 819 players played before me. And I think at that time about 230 had played after me. And I said, and what you learn is that we're all custodians of this great club. We're all just passing through.
Okay, so that is Simon Madden's just feelings about being an Essendon man. Now, this week's fan recall winner of the week was Julian Spears, so congratulations calling that Darcy Parish goal. You want to hear how he did it? Oh, this is how he did it.
Bug with the ball at half-back. Melbourne down by 6. Trying to capitalise here in the fourth to kick towards. He's edged out of it. The experience from Kelly. Kelly with a handball. Makes his way to Fantasia. We know he knows how to use it. That is a beautiful kick to Goddard. Goddard can turn and go here. He's got Zaharakis. We know he loves a big stage. He gives it off. Parish to second gamer. Parish! 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 Goodness me! Darcy Parish has kicked his first goal in AFL footy in his second game. It is a game sealer. Unbelievable from the Bombers. Give me your thoughts, Doug. I cannot believe it. Unbelievable. You called it well. The Bombers, Zaharakis, he gives it up to Parish. He's kicked a goal. That should be it. Look at what it means to him. Look at what it means to the club. Unbelievable.
That might be a clubhouse leader. Jules put a lot into that one, a lot of emotion, and had a very raspy voice at the start of that. I wonder how many practice goes he had before he had one that he was happy with, Herbie.
He was passionate, there's no doubt. No doubt, passionate and you're accurate. I think that's the secret to good commentary, isn't it? But no, definitely the most passionate of the ones we've had so far. I think you're right, he's right up the top. I'd love to hear Jobe have a crack at something like that, Xavier.
Yes.
I think next week we could throw Jobe a line and let him go with one of his own moments or one of his favourite moments. It'd be fantastic to hear. What do you think, Jobe?
I might commentate a footy trip moment. If you could, if you'd like to give me a video version of a footy trip moment, Ernie, and I can give some commentary to it, like a pool deck scenario or something like that.
Well, I've got one of you. Do you want me to share it with the public? I'm not sure we did do, but anyway.
Probably not.
There's a special dance you used to do on those trips. Move on, would you?
All right, I might take over here just to make sure that, to remind everyone to jump on the website. This week, the fans have a chance to recall Cale Hooker's match winner against Hawthorne. Now, fortunately for Cale, it's not him chasing Lance Franklin down the members' wing at the MCG. It's actually him kicking a ceiling goal against the Hawks. So jump on the website and have a go at calling that one. Before we go through a little bit more about what Essendon means to not only the guys that are part of this show, but also the fans and the members, this is what Mark Harvey thinks Essendon means to him.
Define me as much as your family can define you. Essendon's define me, which I find fascinating in many ways. That's the reality of what's transpired in my involvement with Essendon. It's defined who I am now. Always be indebted to the club for what it is and what it's done and what it continues to do. A massive part of my life, and it's taught me a lot of things.
Mark Harvey, certainly one of my favourites when it comes to Essendon. Now, Xavier, before you take over for the last bit of the show, I know that there's plenty you want to talk about. We've actually got some fans and some members that have put in their views on what Essendon means to them. So I've got 3 to read out, and some of these are really good, and they all get a Coles voucher, which is very handy. So the club will be getting in touch with you all. Firstly, it is Danielle on Missing Footy, and it reads, I didn't spend nearly as much time watching football last season, and it's only now that I realise how much I actually miss cuddling up in the cold at the MCG, keeping warm by unconsciously shaking my legs and vocalising my frustrations, letting those moments at the game dictate my thoughts, my daydreams, my conversations for next week. I know winter and home just won't be the same this year. We all wait it out together, and it'll feel that much sweeter when we're all back at the MCG. So that's from Danielle. That's very well written. So is this one from Ashley on Mark Mercuri's goal in the famous 1993 preliminary final. With the benefit of hindsight, every time I watch Mercuri's goal, despite knowing every piece of it, every piece of commentary, every noise from the crowd, every blip on the worn-out old videotape, I knew it was the moment our players believed that they would win. The moment, my moment. It will live with me forever. Sure, there have been other special moments in the years that have followed, but none that have matched that. So that's from Ashley. And another one here from Nick, who is a Scottish immigrant. And it reads, as Essendon got on top, I just remember this feeling of pure joy back in 1988, his first game he went to. When each goal that rained down, we stopped collecting cans and soaked it up. The ball kept going through with ease from every part of the ground. Fans shook the stands, hurtling chips and beer into the air. It was absolutely brilliant. The crowd was yelling, fish, fish, fish. I said to Angus, who's that? And he said, that's Paul Salmon. He kicked 7 goals that day as the Bombers won easily. So that's from Nick Gamble. That game in round 1 of 1988 against North Melbourne. So there's just a bit of a snapshot, Xavier, from the Essendon fans, the Essendon members. Those three, Danielle, Ashley and also Nick, will all get some vouchers thanks to Coles to help get everyone through a difficult time as I throw back to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Whitey. It's great to hear that the passion, the uniqueness of those stories from the fans. I guess I'm interested to sort of throw to both Jobe and to James about what does the Essendon membership mean to them, that they sort of come from a unique perspective, having spent almost 25 years collectively at the football club between them. You know, what does the Essendon fan mean to them, the Essendon member mean to them?
Yeah, well, I think for me, Xavier, it's the loyalty, you know, like and the care that I've experienced through my journey, and obviously had you know, Dad and his time through football, and you know, he was much loved by a lot of Essendon people, you know, and I was able to be displayed the same level of care and love, and that's what I experienced. And you know, I've got some great relationships through my time at Essendon, and you know, I remember I had the same you know, coterie members and things like that had supported me, and a group of you know, the Bombardiers, who were a group of sort of elderly females who I used to have dinner with every year and catch up with and talk footy, and I could see, like, they've been supporting the club for, you know, 50, 60 years, and the level of passion that they have for the football club. And you know, you forget sometimes how much football means to people, and how much people really love and care about the footy and the Essendon Football Club, and you know, how difficult it must be for them to not be able to be there and watch the games at the moment.
Yeah, look, I think Jobe's and my experience have been very similar in terms of, you know, family and what the football club meant. And watching Essendon from afar as a kid, you know, going to games, but also watching on TV, you see it as a bit of an institution. You see the players, the grandstand, you see the VFL, you see the AFL. But it's not until you become a player who was a supporter that you realise how important those members and supporters are for the players. I still remember my first, you know, 10, 15 games feeling like a supporter out there on the ground, and you know, went from one Saturday afternoon standing with my auntie and her family, you know, watching the game of football, to the next Saturday afternoon running out in front of the same crowd, and you do feel very, very privileged. But the members are members and supporters. I think, you know, obviously the members pay, but to put them all into one group, the supporters of the Essendon Football Club, for the players, for the ex-players, are the most loyal group of people, and they do stick by you, as we know, Jobe. I mean, whether it's the good times or the bad times, I think Essendon supporters have never disappeared, or Essendon members have never disappeared, and that's why, you know, everyone at Essendon is now starting to come together, because they want some success to repay the members and supporters for their years of loyalty. For a long time we had, you know, huge success, and I think as the club's trying to do, Xavier, and doing very well with the coaches and the players, trying to reward this membership group and this supporter group for a great sense of loyalty with a team they can be proud of on the ground, and it's getting very close to being that.
Yeah, I think, Hurdy, for me as well, is it's the joy that you provided for people. You know, like because there is so much passion and love for the football club. You know, being able to contribute in some way through playing, the amount of joy that you're able to provide people. That's the thing that I think there's something really that I look back on as a really special and incredibly grateful that I had that opportunity to provide that level of joy to others. And that's sort of, I think, the beauty of professional sports and what they can do for people.
What would you, last question, because we're running over time, but like your greatest Essendon moment, it could be as a player, it could be as a fan before that or watching your father. I know for me, like I'll never forget when I was only 3 or 4, and 4 I think I was, when Leon Baker ran into that goal in '84, and I still remember sitting on my dad's lap, threw me up, and that was probably my first real Essendon memory, and still probably my greatest for so many reasons. Like for each of you, what would your favourite moment be?
I have to probably be quite cliched and say that was my favourite moment, Xavier. I remember staying at my grandfather's farm up in Romsey with my grandparents and my mum and my sisters and my dad, and we drove to the ground 84 grand final day, and just sitting there with my dad and my uncle, I think it was, and watching the game, and just the drive back to Romsey, my grandfather's farm, was one of the happiest moments of my life. To have seen Essendon win a grand final, to watch that last quarter, it was that when you think back about the real memories, as good as playing was, and all the things but that was as good a football memory as I've ever had, and it was just, I think, incredible for all Essendon supporters who remember it. The 19 years of no premiership glory to win that game was something very, very, very special.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a little bit the same. Like I loved playing and playing, is something that is, it's a wonderful thing. But for me, my favourite memories are watching Dad play. Like and going to the footy and watching Dad play. That was what I enjoyed, and maybe because I was a kid and life was simpler and it was just pure joy. There wasn't everything else that happened when you become a player and what you're trying to do. But for me, it was the simple joy of going to the footy each week and being able to watch Dad play, and that is my fondest memory of my time at Essendon.
Fantastic. Great memories, guys. And I'm actually going to read out this text. We haven't had a chance to go through texts or take calls today. We've done the show a little bit differently today, but there is a great text that has come through that we can do this live on air. What does Essendon mean to me? Bombers are my escape from the fast-paced world we live in. It's a stress release and a way to socialise, whether it's through social media or at games. Thank you for the memories. Good and bad, and it's one of those things, Xavier, isn't it? When you think about it, it is that escape from the reality, and the reality we're living at the moment. We probably need football more than ever.
Yeah, I think that's right, Whitey, and it's not going to be football as we know it, unfortunately, over the next few months. And I'd love to think there's an opportunity, and we heard from Martin Bacall last week talk about the fact that crowds could potentially be back for the back part of the season. I just hope that's the case, because I just would love for the fans of Essendon and of every other club to get that opportunity, because we know how much it means to them. But just seeing football come back, it felt a little bit weird round 1 without the crowds and everything else like that. I just don't think it'll feel as weird round 2 without the crowds, because we just have missed the game and we all have missed it so much. So, at least we're still seeing we're in the backward stretch now.
As we wrap it up, Xavier, I know we are running a bit over time, but we have had quite a few questions over the last couple of weeks from Essendon fans wanting to know the latest on the Irish players. Connor McKenna's one that obviously stands out because of how good he is, about being able to get back into the country and participate in whatever this pre-season is going to be. Have you got an update for fans on that situation?
Yeah, it's going to depend on their visa type. And for Connor, that will be fine. And I think Connor's actually on a flight. If it's not tonight, it's tomorrow night. It's very shortly to come back, and obviously he's going to have to manage the period of quarantine as per the guidelines that sits right now. But for our other 2 Irish boys, we're still working through that with the AFL and with the government now. But hopefully that provides some clarity for our fans.
Yeah, I thought I'd ask that one because it has come through quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, and we haven't had a chance to ask the question. James Hird, Jobe Watson, Xavier Campbell, thank you very much for your involvement again. And I've got a feeling next week we might be talking a little bit more footy, because I reckon it's getting a bit closer, and we might sort of try and amp that up on the show as well. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
And for all Essendon fans out there, thank you for your continued support. It's great to see so many text messages and emails and tweets coming through that you're enjoying the show. It's great to listen to the guys in action, even though it's just having a chat. It's fantastic to have the involvement of two legends of the Essendon Football Club and also the CEO. We'll catch you next week.